And I'll remind everyone, the bottom line with all this, the reason we're here today is because every time one of those trees gets cut down, carbon dioxide is released into the atmosphere, which drives climate change. So what's the reason for that difference? Why is the forest degradation or the deforestation not as bad in Central Africa as it is in some other parts of the world? Is this a success story?
I would say yes and no. Yes, because we still have forests. And no, because in a way, it means, I think, the economic development that occurred in places like Brazil, for example, where they are cutting down forests to make room for corn or soya or, ranching, cattle raising, is not happening in Central Africa. So somebody might look at that, like Brazil has made progress economically. It's now called an emerging country, an emerging economy. Central Africa is still very much underdeveloped, countries. So that's why I'm saying yes and no. So it really depends which side of the equation you're looking at. Yeah.
Well, I want to bring it a little bit into these negotiations here. I know you just arrived last night, so you might not have the latest up-to-the-minute details, but we're going to be bringing those to you as they unfold over the course of the next week or so. Let's talk a little bit about RED. RED is this program that was created in 2005 in an attempt to save the forests and slow climate change. Can you just give us an overview? How does RED work? What's the point? What's the process?
Well, as you summarized it, is basically once it was established that forests are a major contributor to absorbing greenhouse gases emissions. So one of the cheapest way or most efficient way, easiest way to slow down global climate change is to protect forest. So that means to compensate or to give incentives. I actually hate the word compensation. I think it has some connotation which is not right in my mind. But to provide incentives for countries that still have large chunks of forest to keep those forests. But that means to make them realize that forest as standing trees has equal, if not more value than selling timber or these other things for which forest is cut down to provide for livelihoods.
But when you're a very poor country and you're desperate for money to, fund education programs, fund healthcare programs, I can understand why a country would say, well, maybe this forest has long-term potential income for us, but we need this money now, and our people need it now.
Exactly, and that's why I think one of the greatest advances that was done in 2007 after the COP in Bali, COP15, the conference on climate change, was for some countries, say like Norway, UK, and a few others, Australia, just to name a few, realized that it was very important to begin providing that kind of incentives to tropical developing countries which have forests so that they can begin the programs of, conserving those forests. We don't have to keep waiting until all these negotiations are finalized, because in fact, you may find yourself in a very perverse situation where you encourage those countries, let's go fast on cutting down the trees so that when the RED is finally there, we are going to be compensated very highly to keep whatever little we bereft, you understand? Or to put in place new tree planting, reforestation, afforestation program, which of course can work, but in the meantime, we will have created a vacuum in terms of the potential to absorb carbon. So, but there are many, many things that have to be looked into, one of which is the right way to pay for it.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you about, because this is enormous sums of money that we're talking about here. This is not small potatoes. And we're talking about many governments around the world that have not always been the most transparent. Might be a nice way to say it. So how do we know what happens to this money?
That's a very, very big question. We have to be sure that the right governance mechanisms are in place so that that money indeed is going to be used for what it was intended to begin with. Because if it goes into the pockets of corrupt governments, which are going to use it for whatever, and yet the forest will be cut, everybody will be a loser. So I think it's one of the critical issues to really look into. And part of the work we do at CIFOR is to look at governance mechanism around forest management, irrespective of RED. Even before RED began to be talked about, CIFOR, which has been there for more than 15 years, was already working on governance issues. And one of the things, one of the means to slow or to counter the potential for the money being paid for RED to go into other uses is to make sure that all the concerned stakeholders actually have a place in the decision making. So I don't think it should be left to the governments alone to manage. And in fact, in Cameroon, we can already learn from what is going on, where the forestry taxes that are being paid by logging companies, there is already a mechanism that provides for the distribution among various levels of stakeholders. So normally like 50% goes to the central government, so it can contribute to the budget of the state for all kinds of other things. Then 40% goes to the local municipality, say the district where the forest is located, where the logging company is operating, and 10% immediately to the local communities living around that area. So in principle, in theory, it's a good way. But even within that, we still see flaws that, money gets diverted and not used to really achieve sustainable socioeconomic development. So there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen with RED, because otherwise we would just be exacerbating a bad situation already rather than rectifying and using it to learn to do positive things with RED.